Bom dia a todos, good morning everyone. Bom dia desde o Instituto Português Além Fronteiras, PBBI, Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, da Universidade do Estado da Califórnia em Fresno. Esta sessão vai ser em inglês, esta sessão do 49º Congresso da Luso-American Education Foundation. Portanto, que é, obviamente, este ano apresentado sob os auspícios do Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, da Universidade do Estado da Califórnia. Como eu vos disse, esta sessão vai ser em inglês, vamos desde já, portanto, fazer a transição para a nossa segunda língua. So welcome everyone. As I mentioned in Portuguese, this session is in English, and welcome to all of you who are joining us here on Zoom, and welcome especially to those of you who are joining us on social media. We're very, very happy for the turnouts. The last 2 days, we've had a total of over 6,200 people join us on various platforms with various groups also sharing. So we thank you all for being part of this journey. We're very excited. This is our third and last day of the 49th Annual Conference on Education and Culture of the Luso-American Education Foundation, as I mentioned in Portuguese, hosted this year by California State University of Fresno through the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI, at better known Fresno State. California State University of Fresno is such a long name. Fresno State is much easier to say and much more recognizable, probably. I'm very happy to kick off the day. We have 6 different sessions, this one now at this time. We have another one. These are California times at 10 a.m., one at 12, one at 2, and our closing events at 4 o'clock. And so this session is, as you can see there in the wonderful presentation that our presenter put together with that beautiful picture of the beautiful city of Lisbon, where she's at. Bridges of Belonging, How Dual Citizenship Strengthens Diaspora Influence Across the Atlantic. I'm a firm believer in that. That's why Jennifer and I worked on that title, because it is a way to have more influence in Portugal. We talked about that yesterday with the Conselheiros da Diáspora Portuguesa, or the Conselheiros das Comunidades Portuguesas, the advisory board for the Portuguese government, with 4 of these counselors from the United States and Canada, and all of them said that the more we have citizens in the diaspora of Portuguese background and even living in Portugal or going back and forth or living in the States, but being and in Canada and other parts of the world, being a Portuguese citizen, obviously we have a bigger influence. So our presenter is Jennifer Toy, as you can see there, and Jennifer is an immigration specialist with a proven track record. You can check out her wonderful site, and congratulations, it's so well done. Portugalsite.com, very, very well done, very professional, obviously. And so since 2018, Jennifer has been working in partnership with a Lisbon and Coimbra-based law firm as a California-based immigration specialist to help clients realize their dreams and accomplish their goals of obtaining Portuguese citizenship or legal residency. And she'll explain, of course, the difference. Jennifer has worked on so many very different scenarios, and these have given her deep insights into how to overcome the many challenges and roadblocks that can arise during the process of obtaining citizenship or residency. It's not just filling out the form, and even the form has some tricks to it. So please do consult a specialist. It's extremely satisfying for her to guide her clients through their respective paths to acquisition, ancestral, spousal, residency, investment, golden visa, amongst others. And so to date, Jennifer has helped over 70 people, and she's always extremely grateful, touched, and honored that her clients refer her to their friends, to their family, to their loved ones. For her, this is, of course, the ultimate compliment, and indeed it is. So for a detailed description of her background, you can also go to portugalstyle.com. That's Portugal capital P, style capital S, portugalstyle.com, and we'll have a link to it as well in the chat. So welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for making dreams true since 2018, and welcome, of course, here to Fresno State and to the Luso-American Education Foundation Conference, albeit virtually, but we are happy to have you.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for inviting me here. And I do want to state up front that due to the nature of the screen sharing, I will not be able to see my speaker notes on the computer. So if you see me looking down, it's because I have my notes on another device so that I can follow along with the visuals. So anyways, thank you so much again, Senior Dinesh, for having me here. I really am honored. Um, the ability to help people has given me much satisfaction in my life, and the ability to strengthen the diaspora, and exactly to the title on how dual citizenship strengthens this through the diaspora, is really, really true. And there are many areas that are beneficial to discuss, and I anticipate that attendees will likely to have questions. How did you want to handle this, Senor Dinesh? Do you want them to type in and then we answer on the spot, or
Yeah, please. If folks have any questions, please please just type in on the chat. I'll follow it and I'll pass them on if Jennifer does not see them. And those on social media, I'll be monitoring the social media here as well.
Okay.
So I'll just if there are questions, I'll jot them down, and at the end we can, we can go through them, of course.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, oh, hold on one second. I'm sorry. We're going to cover a lot of information in this session, so buckle up, everyone, for a fun ride. Anytime I talk about Portugal, I have a huge smile on my face. I have such a great affinity for the country, the people, the culture, etc. And I love the title of this session because with our lives, busy lives, juggling work, family, daily chores, challenges, sometimes it's hard to feel the pull to our ancestries and to our roots. So it's always very touching for me when my clients relate how, especially as they perhaps have more time in their lives due to retirement, or maybe a Portuguese ancestor passes, that the heartstrings tug and they feel and want a sense of belonging. And the Portuguese culture is literally beckoning and calling their souls. And this is not an exaggeration. I have clients that really want to learn more Portuguese or learn how to cook the recipes of their grandparents. And suddenly now there's this real desire to bring more of Portugal and the culture into their lives. And the same is true for spouses of Portuguese citizens who have children with Portuguese ancestry. The desire to keep that culture alive or to raise the children in a multicultural or a bicultural household is something that also motivates spouses towards the bridges of belonging. And that's especially in my case, because some people may not think it's obvious that I'm a Portuguese citizen, but I am married to a Portuguese citizen and with a long family history of the diaspora, as well as family here in Portugal, the home that's been in the country, been in the family for over 100 years. And when we go there to the home, it's like time stands still. And it's a really cool feeling that you can't really describe until you experience it. So, as mentioned, I obtained my citizenship through the spousal route, and I had to learn A2. I had to go through many of the routes that my clients have to go. So I really feel their I'm not going to call it pain, but their fear and trepidations about having to pass A2. I've also gone through multiple routes myself of attempting to get a resident card, and it was a 14-year-long journey. And then I finally got smart and decided, okay, number one, I'm going to learn Portuguese properly and be educated by educators like yourself. And then I'm going to work with an attorney to make that happen. So this is what we're going to be covering in this section. In this session. The first example is how dual citizenship actually does strengthen the diaspora influence. And then, hang on one second, just only because it doesn't necessarily match what I'm doing. There is without a doubt how citizenship strengthens the diaspora. And we're going to look at examples of both ways: Portuguese US citizens, and then the benefits of being a citizen, a US citizen and a Portuguese citizen. We'll also talk about the benefits, as I just mentioned, and then connecting to the diaspora. And then we're going to also cover citizenship and immigration, and that's kind of the nitty-gritties of how to pursue citizenship. So there are several examples of, from a Portuguese perspective, of Portuguese individuals like yourself who've obtained dual citizenship, US citizenship. And keep in mind that our focus obviously is about the US because of the nature of our audience, but these rules and scenarios apply to those who aren't US citizens that might be Portuguese from other countries, but we're going to focus on the US aspect. So the first example I want to talk about is Antonio Cabral. I don't know if many people know about Senor Cabral, but he's a Massachusetts state representative. And he came to the United States from the Azores, from Pico, when he was 14. And he is one of the highest ranking Portuguese American legislators in the country. He's worked to promote relations between Portugal and the US. And in recognition of his work in promoting the relations between Portugal and the US, Representative Cabral was awarded the title of Commander of the Order of Prince Henry the Navigator. And that's essentially the Portuguese Order of Knighthood. So hats off to Senor Cabral. The next one I wanted to talk about was Alberto Carvalho. Now, I am a native of Los Angeles, and I went through the Los Angeles Unified School District. And Senor Carvalho, was a native of Lisbon who came to the United States in the early 1980s after graduating from high school in Portugal. And his efforts to have gone from an undocumented immigrant are extraordinary. And from an undocumented immigrant to the superintendent of the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is the second largest school district in the country. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of students, and he's the dude in charge, okay? But he has a fierce and outspoken advocacy for immigrant students and for being, quote, on the right side of democracy, unquote. And it's truly awe-inspiring. He's extremely well respected, and he's been a member of the Portuguese Diaspora Council. And his compassionate endeavors to help immigrants, not just Portuguese, was influenced by his experience as an immigrant. If one has never heard of him, definitely Google him. Now, there are two other standouts that are perfect examples of how dual citizenship strengthens diaspora influence. And these two are based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And their impact, however, though their presence is local, is enormous, and it touches the diaspora on a countrywide and sometimes worldwide level. And the first example is you, Senor Borges, Senor Dinas. I mean, as an educator, as a Portuguese community leader, television host, writer, podcaster, the Beyond Borders, I mean, you look at all of the things that you have done in your years to really strengthen the ties to Portugal, promote the Portuguese culture and community, bring the community together here in the United States. And you've done this as a volunteer. That's a perfect example of how the diaspora, your dual citizenship, has supported the diaspora. And then another great example is Dr. Manuel Rubén Barroca, who in 1963 became one of the founding members of the Luso-American Education Foundation, the very organization that is sponsoring this conference. Dr. Barroca has a long and storied history of contributing to the diaspora, going back to the early 1950s. He was inspired by his father, who was one of the original founders of the União Portuguesa Continental do Estado de California. Dr. Barroca has, like you, has been volunteering and serving the Portuguese community for more than 70 years. That's right, 70, mais de 70 anos. And you conducted a great interview with him in July of last year, and you posted it on your website. And I love that you called him an icon, and I strongly encourage all of you who are tuning in to visit Senor Dinas, your website, and read about Dr. Barroca's fascinating history of how and why he immigrated to the US, became a dual citizen, and his extraordinary contributions to the diaspora. So the link to your interview is listed in yellow. You can see it on the screen. But I made a tiny URL, meaning I created a short link so that it was easy for people to type that in. All right, now let's reverse the origins of dual citizenship and look at it from the perspective of US citizens obtaining Portuguese citizenship, and discuss the benefits of Portuguese citizenship and how this can strengthen the diaspora influence across the Atlantic. So the most obvious one is, just real quick, on my screen, I see the screen sharing thing right on top. Are you seeing that, or are you just seeing benefits connection to the culture?
We're just seeing the connections to the culture.
Oh, perfect.
Class,
okay.
yes.
All right. So the most obvious benefit is the connection to the Portuguese culture and familial ties at home and abroad. So in today's global integration, especially in the melting pot of California and the Bay Area, cross-cultural connections are evolving. They may be diminishing, they could be strengthening. It really depends on the household and how we were raised. So for those of us who were born into immigrant families, myself included, we can likely relate to the integrating and being part of American culture in parallel to our parents keeping the customs and cultures of our heritage alive on various levels. So obtaining dual citizenship is an excellent way to create or strengthen the bonds to Portugal and the Portuguese culture, especially because there are specific requirements, which I will address later, that must be met for applying for citizenship. Another benefit is language. So for many children of immigrant families born in the US, the language of our ancestors was not spoken or taught at home, as their parents were working really hard to assimilate. And for many Portuguese citizenship applicants, I can see this with my clients all the time. If they speak Portuguese at all, and most don't, it's more household Portuguese that was used by their grandmothers to their grandchildren. So for example, my husband will say, paga a luz, turn off the lights, or like my grandmother would say, study hard and save money. And maybe it's the same for a Portuguese grandmother, but that's kind of the level of Portuguese at which people have been hearing. That's pretty common with my clients. So the ability to speak Portuguese opens up an entirely new level of interaction and satisfaction, not just at home with our loved ones and our ancestors, especially the older ones, but when we're in Portugal. The ability to communicate with relatives and navigate things when you're in Portugal, especially the systems. And Senor Dinesh, I think you're very well aware of how it's a great benefit to speak Portuguese when you're navigating systems in Portugal. And telling jokes. I mean, the ability to tell a joke in Portuguese, and number one, we say it, and number two, the person laughs. That's a big element of success, at least in my book, right? Like, as I say to people, it's like a MasterCard. When you can do that, it's priceless. So, and then most importantly, it's respectful. I mean, the Portuguese people are so appreciative when one makes an effort to speak the language. And one would be surprised how many doors actually do open as a result of that. Portuguese culture is so gracious and gentle. And when we speak the language, it's just a really strong show of respect to Portugal. And when you obtain dual citizenship, and I'll touch on this in a bit, as a grandchild, there is a language requirement, and it's a great benefit. And we'll talk more about those benefits in a bit. Okay, so the other benefit is pretty obvious, the ability to live and freely travel in in Portugal and other EU countries and territories. This is a big one for a lot of people, and that they clearly want the ability to live and travel freely throughout the EU. And then living in Portugal, it's a very high quality of life. There's a lower cost of living. And however, that is rapidly changing due to the increase in foreigners and other economic factors. But relatively speaking, it's still much less expensive to live in Portugal. And I cannot not mention the food, Senor Dinesh. I mean, come on, is Portuguese food not the best food? There could be an entire session on just the food of Portugal, and I'm sure there has already been one. It's just simply the best. Oh, before I move on, I just wanted to hit one more point I forgot to mention about living freely and traveling in Portugal. And that has to do with the Schengen Agreement limitations without citizenship. In other words, if you're not a citizen and you don't have a resident card or needs to legally live in the country, you are only entitled to be in the EU for 90 days out of a given 180. And a lot of people think that 90 days means, oh, I'll spend 90 days in Portugal and 90 days in Spain and so on. Well, that's not the case. The clock starts when you enter the country. You have 90 days within a 180-day period to spend in the EU total, regardless of where you go. And after 90 days, then your time is up. So, okay. Now, before we dive into, oh, the last one, the vote to vote. I mean, come on. Historically, people have given up their lives for the right to vote, and it's really easy to take advantage of the ability to vote and maybe be apathetic. But the ability to vote in Portugal exists as a US Portuguese citizenship, as a US Portuguese citizen. And it's really easy. You literally get a ballot delivered to your home. You fill it out. It's a little unconventional to how we're used to voting in the United States. And then you mail it back in a prepaid envelope. I mean, it really is that simple. So the ability to really have a say and a voice in the Portuguese government is another benefit of being a dual citizen, and how it can, in some opinions, strengthen, or, and I won't go down that path, but it really kind of all depends on your opinion on where politics could go. But we have a voice as a citizen. All right, the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is very important and I have direct experience with, is actually connecting to the diaspora while we're at home. So there are cultural organizations that allow us to do that. And this, even if one is not a citizen, one can connect to the diaspora and become really affiliated with the Portuguese. So the first one, Senor Dinish, I don't know if you logged off, but anyways, the first one is the Luso-American Education Foundation. You know, as mentioned before, this organization was founded 62 years ago, and it strives to inspire ambition, cultural heritage, and encourage lifelong learning within the diaspora. I mean, how many people are aware that every year this organization awards scholarships to students and lifelong learners? Talk about a great benefit. The next one has to do with Portuguese cultural centers, and I'm going to talk about and plug IDEST, or the Sausalito Portuguese Cultural Center. And all of the websites are obviously in yellow. So I spent several years volunteering with this organization, not only because I had a genuine love for the organization and the people who ran it, but also because at the time that I applied for citizenship, there was a requirement that I serve the Portuguese community where I lived. So although it was a requirement, I absolutely do not regret for a second the time that I spent at IDEST, or the Sausalito Portuguese Cultural Center. It was really fulfilling to help and support the Portuguese community. And it also gave me the ability to interact with a lot of the folks that spent a lot of time there, and I could practice speaking Portuguese. So it was really great. And I certainly encourage people to get involved in their local organizations. And there are a lot of them in California and also on the East Coast. So the next one is the Lusitano USA organization for the Macanenses. And this is a very large and active organization that supports the people from Macau. And they have a lot of activities and events. They actually teach Portuguese. There's Portuguese classes, Senor Jose Luis. And they actually also organize a trip to Macau every couple of years where it's like a giant party. My in-laws have gone and they had a great time. And it's another way for people to get involved that may not have come from mainland Portugal, but definitely check out the LusitanoUSA.org website. Okay, there are other cultural organizations that I want to touch upon. The Luso-American Foundation. This is a very active organization with a vibrant and large membership. Their focus is on the Portuguese, they are the leading Portuguese fraternal benefit society in the United States. And for generations, they have helped support individuals from all walks of life with financial services, scholarships, youth camps, youth councils, etc. There are all kinds of ways to get involved with this organization. And then we have PAUCUS, which stands for Portuguese American Leadership Council in the US. It was founded in 1991 with the purpose of providing a singular national voice that could advocate for the interests of Portuguese Americans in the US. Definitely check them out as well. They serve the community on so many levels: advocacy, leadership, community. Definitely visit their website to see what they're all about. And then the last one I wanted to hit upon which again, there's so many of them, but FLOD. And FLOD stands for Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento. It's another fantastic organization that promotes the development of Portugal, the Portuguese, and the Portuguese descendant communities through cooperation with the United States. So they're a bridge between the two countries. And they also have scholarships, grants, awards, and many other opportunities. So again, check out their website, check out all these websites and see what these organizations can offer you. They provide tremendous benefit, and it's a great way of connecting to the diaspora. All right, so citizenship and immigration. So let's start the dive into this. A lot has happened over the past decade, especially over the last few years post-pandemic in the areas of citizenship and immigration. So I'm sure you've seen the ads. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, okay, great. I'm sure you've seen the ads in so many places promoting Portugal for travel and retirement. It seems like every week there's another story in the media about retirees, families, workers, etc., who have moved to Portugal. There's no doubt this has greatly impacted the country, the culture, and especially the people. I've seen firsthand the changes in just the last couple of years. It's a lot more crowded in the cities. It used to be that English was more of a minority language, and now it's the main language you hear in the major cities. And there are many, many more foreigners. Prices are skyrocketing. And Lisbon is becoming one of the most expensive cities to live in Europe. Meanwhile, the wages of the Portuguese have not moved. So there's clearly been an impact. And then there's, of course, over tourism, which obviously is not the same as citizenship and immigration, but many people who are moving to Portugal and becoming citizens are doing so because they fell in love with the country as tourists. I mean, who doesn't love Portugal, right? And that includes Madeira and the Azores. It's just so beautiful. So the Portuguese people are seeing their neighborhoods and lifestyles overrun by tourism and massive amounts of visitors. And this is all impacting their daily lives. And I appreciate you staying with me while I'm going to just spend a few more minutes on this, because there is a point of all this. And a lot of it, there is the number of foreign citizens has made dramatic increases since the pandemic. And right now there are, and I'm going to probably repeat this later on because this has a direct impact on applying for dual citizenship. Yes, it's true. There are 515,334 active applications to date in the registration office. That's a lot of applications, especially when you consider that the total population of Portugal is under 11 million people, which is not even the size of the population of Los Angeles. And you look at the land mass and the population size, and there's a big increase in foreigners compared to actual Portuguese natives. So the processing times from start to finish for all applicants, except for those under 18, have, again, I'm going to use the word skyrocketed, and increased to 3 or more years depending on the scenario. Some people are having to wait 5 years. So applying for citizenship is no longer a quick situation that can only take, in my case, it took 20 months, which was longer than it would have been except for the pandemic. So as part of the diaspora, how does this impact the country and the culture? So years ago, as I mentioned before, English was not very common. Now you rarely hear Portuguese being spoken in the busy areas of major cities. And the Portuguese people are so accommodating so that there literally is almost no requirement, even for people who are living in Portugal, in the major cities, to speak Portuguese. They're in Portugal. Portuguese has been the language forever, but there's a dilution in that country. So, when I think about how that's impacting the culture in the country, I've seen firsthand how these changes have impacted the lives of our family, Portuguese friends who live here. A member of our family is an educator, like you, Senor Dinesh. She's been teaching in the public school system for over 30 years. She's not benefiting at all from the influx of money that's coming into the tourist sector, which was just recently calculated at 22% of Portugal's GDP. 22%. We think about trickle down economics and how it's impacting the locals. In so many ways, it's not. So, and then of course, there's the housing crisis. So it's virtually impossible for young people to afford housing. So many are still living at home well into their adult years. And even those who are in their late 30s with good salaries are in room sharing accommodations with roommates. And as a result of the demand on housing, there's demonstrations regularly and protests. And the last challenge I want to bring up is the strain on the systems, healthcare, social services, etc. Portugal is experiencing massive growing pains, just like many other countries. So why do I bring this all up? Because as the diaspora, do we have an obligation to maintain and preserve the culture, to strengthen family ties, to get and be involved and support the diaspora, to bring meaningful change back home? I mentioned voting, etc. And one of the reasons why people love Portugal is because of its gentle culture, the civilized society, and a more simple, slower way and pace of life. Well, a lot of that's changing. So if we as a member of the diaspora have an obligation, what does that obligation look like? What can we do to protect and preserve the land and Portuguese culture? I mean, that's not a question for me to answer. Perhaps it's through a mindfulness and awareness of our impact across the Atlantic or anywhere we go for that matter. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. Any questions so far, Senor Dinesh? I've done all the talking so far.
No questions have come through. There was one question on social media a little while ago, actually came through right after you just talked about this mindfulness and awareness of our impact. So like 5 seconds ago, and it asked about, the person said, let me pull it up here, and this other one, something like, I've heard from relatives there that especially in the islands of the Azores, that properties have gone up substantially because foreigners are buying, and they can't buy property now, their sons or their daughters. What does the speaker know about this, or if anything? I mean, that I know that's I'm sure you've heard that. You're there in Portugal.
Oh, yes. And it's true. The property values across the country and in the islands are so expensive. And even as an American who lives in the Bay Area, the prices are high. And this trend is not slowing down. It hasn't slowed down. It hasn't slowed down with any economic downturn. As I mentioned earlier, there's ads all over the place in journal, media outlets, websites that just talk about how great it is to live in Portugal. Well, it's getting way more expensive. Even a bottle of azeit, olive oil, it's €7 for a small bottle. I mean, that's more expensive, a lot more expensive, especially if you buy olive oil at Costco, like we do. But the salaries have not gone up for people. And if you look at websites that talk about the influx of foreigners and the diaspora, we're considered foreigners. We have blood ties and such, but we're still considered foreigners. There is a backlash that's occurring. And this is why, I really wanted to touch upon, and I appreciate you letting me talk about what is our obligation and our mindfulness and awareness of our impact. Because my personal opinion is that we do have an obligation. What does that look like? I can't answer that for others. But for me, I want to make sure, and I'm not ethnically Portuguese, but I'm so tied to the country and the culture, my husband's family, my own family here, that's our chosen family that we're so close to. I'm very concerned. So mindfulness, awareness of our impact. And hopefully that's an adage that we can take no matter where we go, no matter what country we set in, no matter what land we step on. And this is where I talked about how it's respectful to learn the language and speak it. It's another way of being mindful and aware. So anyways, yes, unfortunately, property values are skyrocketing. Okay, so let's now talk about paths to citizenship and obtaining dual nationality. And I suspect that there are a lot of viewers who are really interested in this, obviously, because with 500,000+ applications in progress. And that's just from the last couple of years. And it's going up big time due to the changes in the current law that are being proposed. In fact, for those who may not know, there has been a big rush of applicants applying through the residency route due to unknown or unannounced, I should say, prior to the date it was announced in June about changes to obtaining citizenship through residency. And it's caused a big impact on applications for all cases, as I mentioned before, and that includes some of the categories we're going to talk about now. But 500-something thousand applications, and it's growing. So I'll say it now and I'll say it again. If you are thinking about applying for citizenship, and especially if you need to learn the language, you need to start now. Go enroll in one of Senora Dinesh's classes. All right, so there are several different paths. One is birth, one is ancestral, spousal, residency, and investment. And believe it or not, a lot of the diaspora, even if they qualify for ancestral, they actually sometimes do utilize residency and investment, and we'll talk about why in a minute. Let's talk about birth. So with birth, it really depends on, let me just find out where I am because I've jumped ahead. Okay. So, excuse me one second. Okay, birth. Birth on Portuguese soil. It depends on when you were born. And this is an important point I wanted to discuss because this really impacts the ability of the diaspora to have applied for citizenship. So before 1981, if you were born on Portuguese soil, then citizenship was considered to only those who were born on Portuguese soil, or jus soli. So it gives you birthright citizenship. But before 1981, that citizenship was only applicable to those who were born on Portuguese soil. And it is after 1981, and we actually have a lot to thank for this law, the Diaspora. The law shifted to juiz sanguinis. The children of Portuguese parents were recognized as citizens regardless of birthplace. So this is where the law really opened up for the diaspora to be able to apply for citizenship, because now, like in my husband's case, the children of Portuguese citizens can apply for citizenship even if they were not born on the mainland or on one of the islands. So this is a pretty significant law that we have to thank, which is the law that passed after 1981. So then that leads to the ancestral route. And I'm going to spend a lot of time focusing on the ancestral route because as the member of the diaspora, if you want to talk about that's defined as having blood ties, then yes, it would be ancestral. So the first category we have are direct descendants, or children born to a Portuguese citizen. And then we have a grandchild, obviously a grandchild born to a Portuguese citizen. And then a great-grandchild born to a Portuguese citizen. So as a direct descendant, okay, I say parabéns, congratulations, because you have typically the easiest and fastest process to citizenship. Also, too, you have minimum documents that are required. And furthermore, you don't have a language requirement. So, woohoo, right? But I want to stop for a minute and say that everything we're discussing today is based on the current laws. And there is no guarantee that the laws will remain in place for any period of time. So as we're witnessing today in the environment with immigration and family reunification laws, the proposed changes to those laws were announced without warning. Now, I want to be very clear, we're talking about citizenship versus the laws that are impacting people applying for citizenship at this since June, as I mentioned before. That's through immigration versus citizenship or ancestral. So there is a difference, and those new laws that are being applied are not necessarily going to impact ancestral routes, but I'm going to talk about how they are going to impact it. All right. So one of the things I also wanted to say that if your Portuguese parent is unfortunately deceased, and again, you were a direct descendant, so you were a child born to a Portuguese citizen, you are still eligible for citizenship, assuming your parent's citizenship was intact at the time of death. So as an example, I have several clients who were born to Portuguese citizen, but their parent had already passed. They not only applied for citizenship, but they are citizens today. So again, if the parent has passed and the citizenship was intact at the time that they passed, you can still be eligible, assuming you meet the requirements, to obtain citizenship. Okay. Now, the biggest advantage of being a direct descendant in terms of not having to pass the language requirement is, let's see. Oh, sorry. Let's talk about this for a minute. So some of the people, their parents, had given up their Portuguese citizenship when they perhaps naturalized to the United States or to another country. So there is the possibility of reinstating the lost citizenship. So it's definitely doable. Keep in mind that the parent must be alive. If the parent has already passed, we cannot reinstate citizenship. But if the parent is alive, we can reinstate that lost citizenship. And then depending on the circumstances, that would enable the child to apply as well. And there's some nuances there that I don't want to go into a lot of detail here, but we can always discuss it at another time. And then children under 12 or, under 18 are fast tracked. So as an example, my niece was under 18 at the time that she applied, hi Izzy, and her application was fast tracked. At the time, the queue for processes was for adults was about 2.5 to 3 years. And she was fast tracked in a matter of, I believe it was less than 4 to 5 months. So if you have a child under 18 and you are a Portuguese citizen, absolutely get your children's citizenship right away. And this also includes the colonies. Okay, so if you were born into the colonies, we've dealt with a lot of cases involving offspring of the residents of the colonies. So that includes people born in Goa, Macau, some of the colonies in Africa, etc. So it's not just to people born in the mainland. But again, we don't know when the laws are changing. So definitely put it on the fast track if you're interested. Now, I'm not sure what's going to happen when I hit this button because there is one more point. There it is. Okay, great. Citizen of origin. Why is this important? Now, when an ancestral candidate, like a direct descendant, is granted citizenship, this citizen of origin is an extremely important distinction between that of a naturalized citizen, which is what I am. As a spouse, I can only be a naturalized citizen. So why is that important? It's because when a person has citizenship of origin, the distinction is that they are considered a citizen at birth. Obviously, they have to exercise their right to citizenship, but once they do, then that means that anything that happened in their life from birth is applicable as a citizen. So if a person got citizenship, let's say they're 65 years old, and their children were born when they were 30, if they are a citizen of origin, their children were also considered citizens at birth. And that legacy of citizenship, without having to pass the language, is passed on to all future generations of that downline. And that's huge. Now, for me as a naturalized citizen, any child that I would have had before I became a citizen is not applicable for citizenship. But any child I have after would be eligible for citizenship. So that's a big one. And I'm going to talk about citizen of origin when it comes to grandchildren. So just please maintain that data point. And I'm really glad that that bullet point actually came up last because I was thinking, where is that bullet point? But it was kind of a good, kapow to that slide. All right, so the next one is the grandchild born to a Portuguese citizen. So in this particular case, we are now having to reach 2 generations back instead of 1. So in all cases, but especially in the grandchild, we must maintain an intact chain of migration. What does that mean? The ancestor at which we are applying through must always have a valid citizenship in the system in Portugal. So if the grandparent, and many of the ancestors from the Azores came over in the 1950s from the volcano, after the volcano, excuse me, and it was required at the time, and I don't know about now because I didn't have to do it, but you'd have to potentially declare allegiance to one country and state that you are going to be, for instance, only a naturalized citizen. So some of these citizens of Portugal from the Azores in the 1950s, when they naturalized to the United States, checked the box on the form that said that they're giving up their Portuguese citizenship. We always do a due diligence for whatever scenario that you're pursuing, and we check to make sure that that citizenship is intact. Now, one thing about the grandchildren is that because we're going back 2 generations, typically the process is a little bit more complicated in that it obviously involves more documents and more processes. So for example, we might have to register marriages that we wouldn't have had to have registered for the parent, the direct descendant, deaths, etc. So one thing I wanted to point out is that it is by law mandated, Portuguese law, that all events of Portuguese citizens, it is an obligation to report them to the system. So marriages, deaths, divorces, etc., must be, according to Portuguese law, registered. So in the case of grandchildren, sometimes, for instance, the grandparents' marriage, they might have gotten married in the US, is not currently in the system. So then we have to register that marriage and then go through all these processes before the applicant can apply. So that's where it typically increases processes. There is a A2 language requirement. And as you can see here in the yellow with the proposed changes, that potential change includes having a exam to pass cultural and civil knowledge. Now, before people get upset about the A2, I want to point out that that A2 requirement is actually a gift. It's a tremendous gift for grandchildren and for spouses as well. And that before 2018, it was an arbitrary decision in terms of what constituted the fulfillment of the requirement to be connected to the Portuguese culture. And connected to the culture could be serving as I did in one of the Portuguese cultural organizations, traveling to Portugal, being on the tax, paying taxes here in Portugal, or learning the language. Well, serving a Portuguese organization, that was a subjective interpretation by the person who was evaluating the application. And so they might say, well, I actually don't think that that's enough. You haven't fulfilled your obligation, etc. Now, paying taxes, that's indisputable. That's an objective check the box, right? Well, when the law changed in 2018, it said that A2, if you pass A2, it's a definitive connection to the culture. So it eliminated the arbitrary ability to granted citizenship, but it would have been naturalized. And as I just explained, there's a big difference between naturalized and a citizen of origin. So be thankful that A2 is a requirement, number one, because it strengthens the ties to the diaspora, it strengthens your ties to the culture. And furthermore, no one can dispute your ability to connect to the culture, because if you pass A2, it's objective. There is nothing about that they can question. Okay. And then with that change in 2018, as I just mentioned, is that you do, like a direct descendant, you get the citizen of origin status. So one thing I definitely want to talk about, however, is that, well, actually, this is the penultimate big point I wanted to make, which is you might have read online or talked to people that said they didn't need A2. Well, and they got citizenship. Well, that is true prior to 2018, and especially prior to 2015, because there was a time between 2015 and 2018 at which the law had changed. So yes, it was possible in the past for people to obtain citizenship without A2, but now it is absolutely a requirement. But Senor Dinesh, I do want to point out that anybody can apply, but if you don't meet the requirements, you're not going to be accepted. So the big one I want to talk about, and it really is important to me, and I hope it's important to everyone who's viewing this and to those who aren't, which is beware of A2 scams. So there is a big scam that's going on right now, and I know not only for a fact because of what I've read, but because of what some of my clients have experienced. So let me backtrack a bit. Portugal has created programs to make it, let's see, I'm going to choose the right word here, to make it efficient for immigrants who have come into the country to learn Portuguese. And they have created programs where they're free, where you attend the classes, and it's through attendance that allows you to earn your certificate. It's not through showing proficiency. Now, that's very different from how I studied. I studied at the Universidade de Lisboa. I studied with private tutors. I've studied with accredited institutions. These programs that I'm just describing are valid programs in place, whatever a person's opinion is. And at the end of the attendance, you get your A2 certificate. Well, here's the scam. There are companies out there that are enrolling people who live abroad into these programs. And in order to qualify for the program, you must be a legal resident of Portugal. So these scams are enrolling people. They're saying that you don't need it, and they're charging exorbitant amounts of money. Now, keep in mind the classes are free. At this date and age, time and age, they're free. They're charging clients, some of them are charging as much as 6,000 euros. And they're obtaining the A2 certificate illegally, fraudulently. So here's what I want to point out. If you submit your application with one of these fraudulent certificates, it's very easy for the authorities who are evaluating your application to check the records to confirm whether or not you were a valid resident at the time the certificate was issued. And if not, you run a huge risk of, number one, your application of being canceled immediately. But furthermore, you run the risk of potentially being blacklisted from ever applying again. So take that time, make the effort, learn Portuguese, get the A certificate, go practice at all of the things that I've talked about before. Please, please, please be aware of the scams. And there are a lot of them out there. Okay. So you can tell I'm very passionate about this. I think it's very obvious how I feel about it. So, okay. Oh, begin your A2 studies now. Yes, now. All right. So let's talk about great grandchildren. So up until now, and not even up until this moment, great grandchildren cannot apply. It has stopped at going 2 generations back. But there are proposed changes to the law that they're talking about now. And it's likely that it's going to open up to great grandchildren. And that's not just from the diaspora in the US, but the colonies. And this is really impacts the colonies because the ability to go back 3 generations now. But same thing, intact chain of migration. Now, the things I'm talking about now, again, it's not been finalized, but the attorneys have assured me that these things that I'm talking about now will absolutely be part of the requirement. And then there will be the A2 language requirement also included, very likely, versus perhaps with the grandchildren, the cultural and civil knowledge. And then their status, however, is naturalized. So it does not pass down to all future generations. So great grandchildren, they have the opportunity, fantastic. And it's not as easy as it sounds, because going back 3 generations and having to document all the processes that occurred between that time and now could be challenging. So that's where we're at with the great grandchildren. All right, what did I put here? Oh yeah, it's a dynamic situation. And in fact, there should be a ruling coming hopefully in the next few months. So stay tuned on what's happening with that. And same thing, beware of the A2 scams because you will need to pass A2. Begin your language studies now. All right, so where and how does one begin? Now, I haven't spoken about, or I didn't make a slide for spouses. I don't know how much time we have left, but I could kind of brush upon that if you want. Where are we time-wise, Senor Dinas?
Yes, if you don't mind, please.
Okay.
You can do it now or later. It's up to you, whatever.
Okay.
I think spouse is an important part that there
Yes,
might be some
indeed.
questions on that. Yeah.
Okay, so spouse, that's very dear to my heart because that's how I obtained citizenship is through the spousal route. And if you are married for less than 3 years to a Portuguese citizen, and it doesn't matter if they're naturalized or citizen of origin, a Portuguese citizen, you do have to pass the A2 language requirement. If you are married between 5 and 6 years and you don't have children, you can apply, but you must pass the A2. If you have been married for more than 6 years and you don't have any children, you can apply without having to pass A2. So there's really a time configuration on when, and your status is also that as a naturalized citizen. So let's just say a spouse had a child from a prior marriage. When they become a citizen, that prior child is not eligible for citizenship. But if they have a child after, even if they're still not married to the Portuguese citizen, if they have their own naturalized citizenship intact and they have another child, that child will be eligible for citizenship as a citizen of origin. So that applies to all naturalized citizens. And let's see, what else was I going to say about the spouses? A2, spouses. Oh, and grandchildren too. I forgot about that one. Grandchildren and spouses and likely great grandchildren, if in fact that's going to occur. We do need to supply a criminal background check for every country that we've lived in since the age of 18 if you've lived there for more than 6 months. So in the US, that means a US FBI criminal report, and it must be apostilled like all the rest of your documents. And that's a little bit of a tricky situation because there's a time stamp on the validity of that document. But spousal routes, what can I say? That's how I got my citizenship. And yeah, I definitely, I'm Portuguese in so many ways, even though I'm ethnically not. So definitely a dear topic to me. Oh, one thing I did want to point out just with the spouses, but also with the downline that I talked about with the citizenship of origin status, and that our downlines can apply, our spouses can apply if you are a citizen, but only after the person has become a citizen. So, for example, a grandchild applies for citizenship and they're in their 60s or 70s. They're doing this, a lot of them, because number one, they've either felt those tugs that I've talked about, or number two, they might not have felt the tugs, but they want to get citizenship for their family members. So they're studying for A2, they're passing. And right now, it's taking sometimes as much as 5 years for the grandchild to get citizenship. And in all situations, the applicant must be alive at the time the citizenship is granted. So I've got one client who has a mother who's 93 years old, and he's got to stay alive. She has to stay alive until her citizenship's granted. And if that queue is going to take, 3 or 4 years, she'll become a citizen at 97. But she's been a citizen, she'll be considered a citizen at birth. So the client can then apply. But the point being is that each generation has to wait until the prior generation has received their citizenship. And that's the same with the spouses. So, okay. Any other questions before I go to this next stage?
None have come through.
Nobody has any questions?
No.
All
No,
right.
you're doing such an awesome job.
Thank you.
That's a sign of a good teacher when there's no questions at the end.
Either that or they're scared. Okay, unfortunately, I cannot see the bullet point because it's right behind my screen sharing icon. What does that say?
Trusted sources?
Oh, okay, perfect. So the first thing to do, there are a couple of ways you can apply for citizenship. You can go DIY. You can do everything on your own. Go for it. Keep in mind that number one, the consul's office for instance, in San Francisco, does not process any citizenship applications. So you truly are on your own if you're DIY. It's certainly a viable way to go, and it's going to save you on fees to myself and to the law firm. However, there are risks involved. There are mistakes that can be made. There could be documents that are omitted. And most importantly, if for some reason the application is stalled and there's a question or even a demand for a document, so I'll back up a bit. If in the course of your application process, there is a document that you did not provide, and there's a demand for that document, there is a requirement to produce that document within 90 days. And here's a perfect example. My first client actually had checked a box on the form. He did DIY, that he had lived in Japan, and he sent that off. And then the application went through. And at the time when the evaluator saw it, they said, you need to produce that criminal report within 90 days. Well, that was not going to be possible at all for him. So he called me, spoke about his case. The attorney took it on. And as it turns out, he filled out the form wrong because he got a work permit to work in Japan, but he never actually lived there. So as I said before, you need to supply a criminal background check for any country that you lived in for more than 6 months from the age of 18. So when the attorney cleared that all up, he became a citizen. But a more important reason is if for some reason there is an issue with the documents, that attorney, our attorneys, are going to go to bat for you. They're going to present the case and go in front of a judge and argue your case. And if you don't have an attorney or someone who's advocating for you, then you're on your own. But that's not to say that the DIY route is not viable. It definitely is. It's just more of a choice. But if you're going to work with somebody, please, please make sure that it's somebody you're comfortable with and that you totally trust them. Because I have several people that I know who literally were, I don't want to use the word scammed, but they literally were walked down a path that was, number one, not viable with what they were being told they need to do, and more importantly, totally misrepresenting themselves as attorneys when they weren't. They were relocation specialists. So find somebody that you're really comfortable with and that you totally trust. And then the other one is gather your documents. You're going to need a lot of documents depending on your scenario. And one thing I wanted to point out, one more thing I wanted to point out is not all scenarios are the same. And just because what you read online and even on Consul's website, it's not to denigrate them at all. It's just that every scenario is different. So in one case, it might be a breeze for somebody. They get 5 documents, boom, they're done. And the same scenario as a direct descendant, that direct descendant might need to get 15 documents depending on what their parents did, depending on how the documents present themselves with the names, etc. So please know that not all the scenarios are the same. And furthermore, what I always tell clients is that it doesn't not matter what we, I, them think is logical. What matters is what we are told are the requirements. So we might think something is satisfactory. So in fact, I have a current client now that told me that she learned the lesson of family lore has no value when it comes to the citizenship application unless it's documented in a official system somewhere. So when we hear about, oh, this person did that and this, that, not, we need to prove it. So just orating the family lore is not going to suffice, unfortunately, until we prove the documentation. So, okay, gather documents. And then we always start with the ancestor search, which not only validates whether that and the citizenship of the ancestor is intact, but more importantly, I have a lot of clients who spend a lot of time and money working with the genealogist to determine information, and then they'll present it to us with a lot of holes. And then I just say, give us the name and birthplace, and especially if they were born before 1912, the parish in which they were born. And these are a lot of the descendants from the Azores. And then we can search the records for them, and all of the information is clear. And all it involved was the consulting hour of the attorney to do that instead of paying for lots of time with the genealogy researchers. And I'm not saying that the genealogy researcher does not have value. They absolutely have value. But what I'm saying is that we could potentially avoid all of that Because if it turns out that there are a lot of holes after we do the search, that's when you can hire the genealogist and get the answers that you need. So a lot of different approaches. It's really more about what somebody's comfortable with. But if you want to look at efficiencies, that's kind of the way to do it. So, all right, start studying for A2, as I mentioned. And I think that's it. That's been a kind of a whirlwind. I hope the seatbelt's still fastened. I can take off the unfastened. What is it? Oh, I can turn off the fasten seatbelt sign. No, so, anyway.
There's a question, Jennifer, from Lynette de Hoza, who is actually going to be on the next panel and is a community leader in the San Diego area. And Lynette asks, does the Portuguese birth record need to be time stated or officially watermarked within 6 months?
So that's a great question. So technically speaking, and I'm going to say technically because it's according to the rules, all documents have a time frame of some sort, meaning maybe 1 to 2 years. The reality is, if a document is obtained, all official documents must have an official seal. I want to be very clear about one thing, however, is if we pull your documents from the record, you don't need to do anything. You do not need to request the record and have it apostilled here or whatever, or have anything validated by the government of Portugal, because when we pull it, it's done. That's a done deal. So that's just an eliminated step there. In terms of the validity of the timestamp, that document, whether it's a birth certificate, marriage certificate, adoption paper, etc., as long as it has the official seal, you get that apostilled. If it's in the United States, it must be at the state at which the document was issued. In theory, yes, there is a timestamp. However, we've never had an issue, even with a document that was apostilled 4 years prior, never had an issue. There is one exception, and this occurs with grandchildren, spouses, and if it passes great-grandchildren, which is that criminal record report. And this is where it gets really tricky when you have a criminal report that has to come from another country. It can take a long time, especially depending on what the country is, to obtain a criminal report. And it must have an apostille in it. So the timestamp has to do with these criminal reports. So in the FBI, the timestamp does not start on the date of the apostille, which is a separate step than actually pulling the criminal record. The timestamp starts the day that that report was run. And where it gets tricky is that the apostille period can be as long as almost 90 days. And that's where it gets nerve-wracking, because unless one pays for an expedited service, and I have arrangements with organizations that are trusted, clients use them not just for apostilling, but wiring money to save them fees, etc. Oftentimes it's worth it to pay an expediting service the fee to expedite that apostille, because it can only be obtained from the Department of Justice. Unlike a non-criminal report, an apostille document is obtained from the state at which the document originated. But FBI must be the Department of Justice or the DOJ. So that's the one for the US that's got the timestamp. Great question.
There's another question that came from, well, there's two questions from, and they're kind of like next to each other, different groups, but it's one of them, a person asked, what is an apostille? That's actually a good question, because it's not a word that we hear all the time. And then number two, this person I think knows what an apostille is. I mean, and it's okay if you don't. But the person said, and I think you just answered that, which is if it's like a birth certificate from, a county in California, it's state apostille, right? Yeah, and I think
yes. Well, okay, so I'll answer the first question first, because that's a fantastic question about what is actually an apostille, because a lot of people don't know. And it all has to do with, I believe it's in 1964, the Hague Convention, which the apostille is a mark that is issued by the Secretary of State from the state at which the document was issued, that validates that that document actually came from an official source. In other words, when you have the apostille on it, it's a seal, and it makes that document valid in a foreign country. So if you got something notarized and you sent it to Portugal, okay, it might work for someone's personal thing, although I always recommend that people, even for personal documents, get it apostilled, because that then makes that document valid in Portugal or any other country at which who signed with the Hague Convention. So the I'm sorry, what was the second question? What was the second question, Dinesh? Senior Dinesh?
Sorry. The second question is, I was looking for another one that popped up, but it wasn't for us. The second question is the apostille. You were explaining what an apostille is. The second question is, and I think you've answered, which is if it is if you were born here in California, for example, that's what the question is,
Right.
that it has to be the state apostille. Yeah, it has to be in Sacramento,
Right.
basically.
So there's a couple ways. So first of all, when you pull a marriage certificate, birth certificate, death certificate, et cetera, and I'm going to speak specifically about California, when you get the document from the county recorder's office. So for example, in the Bay Area, if you were born in Oakland or Alameda County, you need to go to the Alameda County recorder's office. You request the document. And when they give it to you, it will be on the official California stationery. And I call it stationery, but it's more of the official form, and it will have its seal on it. And from there, you would take that to Sacramento or Los Angeles, and you can do it by mail. Or if you're in the Bay Area, I like to suggest to clients that you take the time to take all of your documents. And I'm going to backtrack a bit. If you've got things to notarize or things to apostille, don't do them in piecemeal, because it's going to create more energy and time for you. Take them all at once to get them all notarized, and then take them all at once to get them apostilled. So in the case of the Bay Area, luckily, they reopened the walk-up window, which was closed during the pandemic, and you can hand them your stack of documents, and they will apostille them while you wait, and then you have them back. You can also send them by mail. I'm a little bit more conservative when it comes to using the mail, because first of all, the amount of time, effort, energy, and in many cases, a lot of money that clients have spent to obtain documents, if they get lost in the mail, you got to start from square one. So you can drive up to Sacramento, and you can also do the same in Los Angeles. Secretaries of State offices have the apostille office. Now, there is one other really great way. In fact, a client just did this, which is check the websites of the Secretary of State's office, because they have pop-up kiosks that will apostille outside of their base offices. So for example, I believe it was on October 26th, September 26th, just a week or so ago, there was a pop-up apostille service in Oakland that my client went to and got all of her documents apostilled. There's a dance there, however, because if the pop-up's not coming for another month or two and you want to wait for it, then it's another month or two delay, versus you can drive to Sacramento or drive to LA, whatever, and get the documents apostilled there. There are other documents that you need to have notarized, and some documents you need to make official copies of. And this is kind of a little nuance here, but it's important to point out, which I would point out during the process anyways, and that in the state of California and many other states in the United States, it is not within the legal realms of a notary to make an official copy and then notarize that copy. And you're nodding your head, so you obviously know this. So how does that work? When you have to have an official copy of a document, so for example, your passport, you don't give that to a notary. The notary doesn't walk into the copy room and copy it and then notarize it. How it works is that you make the copy, and then you have to sign what is called, fill out and sign what is called a document custodian form, at which you're stating that this is a valid and true copy. It is that custodian form that gets notarized, and then that whole package of the copy and the notarized document, that is what's sent to get apostilled. And all apostilles have a separate paper on top. So that's one of the little nuances. If you live in Nevada, you could go to a notary, hand them the document, they could make the copy, and then you just send it to the Secretary of State. But in California, and again, many other states, that's not something that can be done.
One last question, Jennifer. So if I have obtained citizenship and my child has obtained citizenship, does the ability to gain citizenship for their children get reset? In other words, since they are an ancestral citizen now, do their children need to have a language requirement? So in other
So,
words, if I have obtained citizenship, okay, it's not me,
right.
but if a person has obtained citizenship, okay, and then their children obtain
Right.
citizenship, okay, do their children, so this person's grandchildren,
Right.
does it get reset, or do they, or in other words, since they are an ancestral citizen, now do their children need to have a language requirement?
Great question.
Right,
So, if a person obtains citizenship as a direct descendant or a grandchildren, then they have what is called citizen of origin. So that means that, again, I think I use the example of a 60-year-old got their citizenship and they had the child when they were 20 or 30.
right,
That child is considered a citizen from the day it's born because the citizen was considered a citizen from the day they were born. So in the case of the questioner or the inquirer, yes, you would. However, I want to make the distinction that if you are a naturalized citizen, like myself,
right.
any child born before I became a citizen is not eligible for citizenship. But any child I have after is eligible for citizenship, and again, they're considered citizen of origin. So to make a long story short on that, and if I were to answer the question just as is, there is no language requirement for anyone applying. And again, that's the laws today. No language requirement for anyone applying as a direct descendant or as a citizen, as a child of a citizen of origin. So the grandchild, and this is where some of my clients who are in their late 60s, and I want to say, for those of you who are scared and are of that age group to pass, these clients have passed. As I say to people, be committed, learn the language, get the right resources, whether it's accredited sources, tutors, etc. Practice, practice. If they can do it, you can do it. It just takes time, but be dedicated. And as spouses and grandchildren, we have to pass. But direct descendants, like my husband, he didn't have to pass Portuguese.
Because his father was Portuguese.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Jennifer. We're running out of time. I mean, I want to quote you again, language and respect for Portugal. I think that that's so important. I think even if you don't want to become a citizen, have some respect for the language of your ancestors and learn at least a few words. I don't care if you're Portuguese background or or Mexican or of an African language or Japanese or whatever. I think it's just a respect to learn a few
Absolutely.
words from your from your ancestors. I always, and this has nothing to do, and this is my opinion, and I guess I have the right to. When you become old, you have a right to your opinion all the time. But I think that, and I agree with people. I agreed that when we came over in the 1960s, I agreed that, and my father, who did not learn English well, or my mom, in their old age, and really hit themselves over the head a couple of times, not literally, but for not learning English enough because they were dependent on their children. And
Right.
they themselves saw that. There was a mistake. It was a mistake for us not to learn English well, being that both of them immigrated in their late 30s. And 30 years later, almost, they weren't, I mean, they could get by, but barely. So I am all for, when you're in a country, learn the language so you can, defend for yourself. And so when people say that to recent immigrants, that was told to me when I came over and everything, and everybody else. Well, it's the other way around now. So I mean, if you're the grandchild or great grandchild of an immigrant, and you have a way to become a citizen, and one of those requirements is, knowing the language. Take what Jennifer just said, and she put it on about every slide, which is start practicing now. The other thing is the program, as you mentioned, is now taking, as you said, 3 to 5 years. And I know that because I have a friend of mine who is waiting, and it's been a little over. He used a service. I don't know what service he used, but use the service, and it's been a little over 3 years now, and I think now the process is finally moving, so hopefully he'll get it
Well,
next
for
year.
him, hopefully, I mean,
Yeah.
if he submitted 3 years ago, yes, his process is moving. I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but I have the actual immediate information about where the timelines are today. And it's all based on when you applied. So in some cases, they're only looking at applications from January of 2021.
Yeah.
So
I
that
think
means
I think
that
he
if you,
applied in I think he applied in late 2021, so hopefully
yeah,
he's
and it's
getting
different
there.
for grandchildren, different for direct descendants.
Sure.
But when
And
you look
so,
at,
yeah. And so
right,
in 3 to 5 years, if you're committed, whether you're living in the States or whether you're living in anywhere else, obviously it's easier if you can go to Portugal a couple of months out of the year. But if you can't, in 3 to 5 years, independently of your age, you can learn the language, if you practice something.
absolutely, absolutely. There are programs that
Yeah.
that that are will cover a year's worth of language in 20 days, and I did that, and it was painful, but it was amazing.
It is. It is. It is. So don't let that be a hindrance, and then don't let it be a stumbling block. And actually, you'll learn the language of your forefathers, which is great.
Exactly.
So
That's
you get your
yeah,
citizenship, and you're honoring your grandparents or great grandparents, with learning the language that was their first language, whether they immigrated, great grandparents or grandparents. So it's I think a win-win situation.
I
Thank you
agree.
so much, Jennifer. We appreciate
Well,
your
thank you.
time.
Obrigado at you. I am so honored to have been included in your efforts, Senor Dinish, and really thank you. It's been
No,
my
thank you.
big
This is recorded. It will be posted on our Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute YouTube page. It'll also be archived in our Fresno State Library, which is good. People can, and on a digital library, people 50, 60 years from now, it can go look at, what the Luso-American Education Foundation, the 49th, talked about. These archives are very, very important. One last word, because
yes.
you were kind enough to mention my name, and just to let people know that I did not pay Jennifer to do that. And
Not at all.
and I was honored to be included with my good friend Tony Cabral, and of course my good friend Manuel. I have the privilege of knowing Alberto Carvalho, and also, but most importantly, Manuel Ben Bahoca. And let me tell people why. Okay, so I met Dr. Bahoca when I was in my 20s. I was a journalist for the Portuguese newspaper and a Portuguese language radio station here in the Valley. It was, I think, my first or second year that I went to the Luso conference as a journalist. I went to the Luso conference as a journalist for about probably 6 or 7 years before I went into education, and then I went as an educator. Um, and I wrote a little bit off and on for Portuguese newspapers. And Dr. Manuel Ben Barroca met me. I met him, and he had the kindest words for me. And he said right off the bat, I've always been analyzing the United States socially, politically, literary. And he said right off the bat, I don't agree with one word that you write, but I like that you're right. And I appreciate you. And I think that that is the true sense of what it means to live in a democracy, is saying, I don't agree with anything that you
Never
said, but
done.
boy, I like reading that stuff. And
Never
so, so I've always grateful to Dr. Bahoka for that kindness, because I was in my mid 20s when he told me that, and that was a good boost for me. So I appreciate that. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Jennifer, once again.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks everyone for
Thank
joining us. We'll be back at 10 o'clock, of course, California time, with Women of Diaspora, Voices of Change and Continuity. And a big thanks again to Jennifer Toy for this truly enlightening and wonderful presentation. Thank
thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Ciao, ciao.
Or boa tarde. Ciao, ciao.